Welcome back to TechPeered. Today we're joined by Cameron Lepper, Director of Platform Engineering at Tribal Group. Cameron leads Platform Engineering, SRE, DBA and FinOps globally across our cloud product suite, with teams spanning the UK, Philippines, Australia and beyond.
Cameron's also been deeply involved in Scotland's wider digital economy skills agenda, including chairing the Digital Economy Skills Group at Skills Development Scotland for the past couple of years. So we're going to talk not just about how you build platforms, but how you build people and pathways into tech as well.
Cameron, thanks for joining us. To start us off, when you tell people what you do, what do they think you do and what do you actually do?
Thanks personally for having me. Those are three very good questions. So what I do is I'm Director of Platform Engineering at Tribal Group. So I look after all of our platform teams, as you mentioned there earlier on. So our platform engineering team that build our platforms out, our DBA team that are specialists in our database technologies, our SRE team that look after the operational side of our platforms and products running on those platforms. And I also look after the FinOps team, which looks after all of those things from a cost and carbon footprint perspective as well. What people often think I do is, well, my mum always says I knit steam, which I think is a really good sort of euphemism, pulling lots of things that are abstract together. So quite often when you think about platforms and products, you think about how those two things go together. A lot of companies have had very different ways of running in the past where your product team is very separate from your platform team. So my role as Director of Platform Engineering is to pull those two teams together. We have a Director of Product. We work very, very closely with them and make sure that they're getting what they need from us and vice versa from them. In terms of what I actually do, I spend a lot of my time working across lots of different teams. So I work really closely with our security team, our finance team, our sales team, our software, product engineering, product management, project management as well. Very sort of wide berth of people. And I spend a lot of time having conversations about how we enable all of those teams. So when I think about platform engineering and what it is, it's really enabling other teams to enable our customers, particularly enabling our developers to enable their customers through those products. So yes, it's a very interesting role and a very interesting time to be in that role as well.
Thanks, Cameron. We look at the routine, the no right path into tech, and your career is a great example of what we talk about a lot, non-linear paths. You've moved through data, dev, cloud, FinOps, platform. When you look back, what were the key turning points?
Well, firstly, I didn't ever think I'd be working in tech, which is always really interesting thing. You might be able to tell from the guitars behind me. My passion was always music. I thought I was going to be a musician, and I used to tinker quite a lot with recording music and using things like FL Studio and playing around with plugins and MIDI controllers. And I think that got me more used to working with technologies, computers, etc. And I sort of thought, well, at some point I need to have a plan B if this music thing doesn't work out. And so I decided to do computing at a university. I think for me, going through the career, so I started off, as you say, as a data engineer, bit of cybersecurity, being a software engineer. The turning point for me was all of the sort of automation around continuous integration, And I used to, when I was working as a software engineer, we used to use what was then called VSDS, Visual Studio Team Services, now known as sort of Azure DevOps. We used to use that quite a lot, and I said, this is the bit that really interests me. How can we roll these things out really quickly? And that got me in when I moved to my previous employer, CloudReach. I moved to the DevOps engineer, and we were really responsible for how do we streamline the automation of deployment of infrastructure, the applications that sit on those infrastructure as well. And I think that got me into a whole world of interest around cloud infrastructure footprint and the cost of that as well, because particularly the CloudReach, the organisation I was working with, was looking at how do they streamline a lot of their cloud infrastructure cost footprint and how can we automate some of that. And that made me fall in love with FinOps and cost optimization. So I had a sort of brief spell out of the hands-on technical stuff and doing quite a lot of FinOps, and now I'm trying to bring that back into platform engineering as a whole. So I think that was probably the turning point, that first flirt, if you like, with CI/CD and using some of these automation technologies available to us to see the art of the possible, and then it's just sort of spiraled from there, really.
There's a thread I love in your story, that creative kind of system thinking foundation. You've mentioned music tooling and that you know kind of building system mindset. What music, what did music teach you that you're still using in your leadership?
Do you know, I think one of the funniest things, and it's not technical at all, actually, one of the funniest things I think music taught me was because I used to play a lot of music. I used to do pubs, clubs, restaurants, used to kind of perform in these environments. And you sort of have to get yourself into a mindset where because I think I'm quite introverted generally. I'm sort of to myself. But you have to be able to, in music, you're telling a story about the songs that you're playing, the music tells its own story, and you've got to get into that headspace. And I think quite often I have found that has helped me with a lot of what I do around speaking to people, whether it's speaking to customers, speaking to other teams, trying to bring our team together. Public speaking was always something I wasn't very good at, especially, when I think back to much younger years. It was something I found really challenging. And it's quite important that you're able to speak to people, not just communicate with them in terms of actually having that conversation, but listening and understanding them as well. So yeah, I think the more I did that, I look back and think, oh, well, actually, maybe I picked up some of that from the music stuff, because you have an ear for music, you tell a story with music, and kind of, in an abstract way, a lot of what we're trying to do in conversations around platform engineering is very similar to that. So I'd say that's part of it. And then just the art of tinkering, failing, getting things wrong. Quite often when you were trying to figure something out, or playing around with, like I mentioned, FL Studio, trying to get some plugin working. Okay, it's not working the way I expect it. How do I fix it? What can I go read up on? How can I play around with this? If I get it wrong, hey ho, we'll fix it. And I think that's quite an important thing about platform engineering. You want to fail fast, learn from it. You want to innovate and do new things and learn how to fix them and move forward from that and learn from it. So those are two very different things. One's very technical, one's not, but I think they both help quite a bit in sort of day-to-day now.
You did a BSc and then an MSc in computing, but your roles show you kept evolving, DevOps, FinOps, optimization, now platform. What do you think enabled you to keep switching lanes so successfully?
I think one of the turning points was, so my undergrad was computing science, just raw computing science, but my postgrad, when I decided to go back to university, I did a joint master's, which was computing for business. And I think I saw in that course something that interested me a lot was technology solves problems, and it solves problems for businesses. But if you don't understand the business side of things, then do I really understand how to solve those problems for a business? I think for me, that's been really important, because I've got that broader understanding. And then from the sort of various roles that I've run, I've been a developer, I've worked in security, I've worked in data engineering. And now I can apply that lens when I think about our cloud platforms. I've got the rounded understanding of the business side of things from the degrees that I've done. And then I've also I can think as a security analyst, I can think as a FinOps specialist, I can think as a developer. And I think that helps you make a more rounded platform, because you can apply that thought process to, okay, if I'm in one of those roles I've been in before, what does this mean for me? What does that look like? And I think that really helps when you're trying to think about platform engineering being an enabler. Well, I know what it's like to be enabled by those teams I interface with, and now it's my opportunity to use that experience to help enable those teams in return.
You've been chair of the Digital Economy Skills Group and recently stood down from that chair role after 2.5 years. But when you were chair, I suppose even now, still been a member, what did you want to change or influence most about Scotland's skills pipeline?
So I think one of the biggest things that I was involved in was actually re-engaging and deeply engaging with Scottish Government. So in the latter stages of 2024 into early 2025, under my chairship, we started a project in collaboration with Scottish Government, in particular with Mr. Richard Lockhead, who is Minister for Business in Scottish Government, around bringing together large tech organisations from around Scotland that have a presence in Scotland, looking at the learning platforms they have. So for example, if you go on Microsoft's website, they've got an abundance of learning and training material there. And then when you go on Oracle's, they might have theirs. You go on Cisco, they have theirs. Pulling all of those together and having using that material that already exists, but in a structured way to say, okay, I want to be a developer. What material is available to me? What pathways can I go through from a training perspective to understand that role, to understand what skills I need for that role, need for those roles? So working on that has been a sort of real labour of love, because it's pulling together lots of really large organisations, and I think that in itself is fantastic to see, because it shows the investment those organisations are making in tech talent in Scotland, which is huge. But it's also just been really good. It's a proper collaborative effort with Skills Development Scotland, who develop and run the Digital Economy Skills Group, with Scottish Government and ministerial involvement there as well as those large tech organisations. So that's been quite an enjoyable thing to be part of. And I'm enjoying seeing, obviously I stepped down as chair at the end of last year, but I'm enjoying seeing that still continue. And there was a big announcement from Parliament last year where that the sort of initiative was formally launched, and seeing how that's been going on has been really rewarding.
No, great, thanks for that. Platform engineering is one of those terms that can mean anything. If you had to explain it to a non-technical exec in 1 minute, how would you describe it?
I would say that we are enablers. I think I mentioned earlier on, we enable our developers to enable our customers. So we treat our platform as our product. So our developers have a role to deliver our products to our customers, and what they need is standard platforms, ease of deploying those products to our customers. So our product is the platforms on which those products run, and it's about making a standardized platform with standardized tooling and standardized operating procedures, so that they know that their customers are getting the same experience, whether they're here or the other side of the world, whether they are a big institution or a small institution. It's standardized platforms, and you're getting the same product from that, and they know they have the ability to deploy at pace, to regularly and seamlessly update, and to flex to, and particularly in our industry, quite fluctuating and variable workloads. There's very much peaks and troughs through the year, and they know that platform and the product align in being able to do that.
And if you had to explain it to an engineer who was skeptical, who thinks platform just adds frictions, what would you say?
I would say that I think quite the opposite is the case. I think we are there to remove friction. So we work very, very closely and embedded within the larger organization. So we're not a team that sits in isolation. You kind of remove that tossing back over the fence. You've got to align your roadmap. You've got to make sure that your product team roadmap and your platform team roadmap are at very least aligned, if not actually the same thing, and just two work streams contributing towards that. That it's more about how you remove friction rather than add friction.
You lead platform engineering as a discipline, but you also led FinOps and cloud optimization. So you've seen the tension between speed, reliability and cost. Do you see platform engineering at the pace those tensions get resolved?
I think it's, so when you think about the well-architected framework from AWS or from Azure, cost optimization is part of that. And I think for me, everyone's responsibility is to look after our cloud costs. I often think about, you can't buy, in any organization I've worked with, I can't buy a keyboard without going through a proper set of processes and approvals, and it being an accountable spend. Somebody somewhere knows you spent £20 on this keyboard. But when you think about clouds, you've got things that got thousands of dollars of recurring spend attached to it. Companies need to make sure that they have proper processes around making sure all of that spend is accounted for. And that's where I think everyone's responsibility and platform teams is to work with the understanding of what does that actually cost. I guess the problem historically has always been visibility of those things. So I've been the engineer where I haven't cared how much something costs. I've just built a solution and gone, it works, great, my job's done, I move on. And then usually 6-12 months down the line, somebody comes along, typically from finance, and says, this project you were working on, it's costing 3 times as much as we thought it was going to do. Can you tell me what's going on? And then you have to start being quite aggressive about how you bring that back. Actually, I say FinOps isn't really about saving money. It's about maximizing the value you get from every bit of cloud spend that we have. And as a business, even in your personal lives, but as a business, that's quite normal and sensible approach to apply to everything. We're always looking for what's the best deal we can get on this, what's the best deal we can get on that. How do we use this the right way so that we're maximizing the value we get from it? That's what FinOps is. And platform engineering should be working as engineers with our FinOps teams to work on how do we get the visibility of what that costs, and then how do we streamline and get the most out of that? How do we contribute across different areas? How do we make sure that we understand how much this costs for this particular piece of work, this particular project, etc.? And I think overall, the two teams need to work. There's a sort of symbiotic relationship between the two. They need to work really, really closely together. And without that, you end up very similar to what I was mentioning before about tossing back and forth across the fence. You end up with that situation where it becomes a punitive thing rather than a collaborative, ongoing thing. And actually, it should be proactive. We should be avoiding spend rather than saving what we have spent. And that, to me, is everyone's responsibility. And that's why it's just as much as architectural design is a collaborative process. FinOps is a collaborative and ongoing process as well.
You also talk about treating platform like a product, roadmap, ownership outcomes. What are the outcomes you think platform teams should be measured on?
So there are obvious things like the reliability and performance of our systems, the ease and the speed and ease with which we can deploy our products on those platforms, the cadence with which we can update our platforms, whether that be through a new version of the platform and the product, or whether it be your operational management of those platforms. So things like your patching and ongoing cycles, not having barriers to those things. How much easier is that? How much you can move towards your end goal of your roadmap, the sort of key objectives that you set out in that joint roadmap. How quickly you move towards those, the sort of lag that you have from other barriers, removing blockers, how much you automate. All of these things are metrics of a successful platform engineering practice. And then when you think about tying that in back to the FinOps conversation, you then have your unit economics of the sort of dollar per compute, etc., and starting to go down that route as well. So there's lots of different metrics, and actually making those publicly visible is quite a good practice as well.
You've hired across platform and SRE in multiple regions. When you're building those teams, what do you actually hire for? Is it kind of like depth, breadth, mindset, or kind of communication?
I think quite often, with the nature of our business, I think quite often we hire for two things. One is somebody who has a track record of looking for, either it depends on the role. So like a DBA, this might not necessarily be quite so true, but for a platform engineer and SRE, looking at processes that are repetitive, laborious, the ability to automate those, find efficiencies in those, using better technologies than previous to improve those processes, but also the ability to be technically bilingual. So what I mean by that is the ability to speak to your technical and non-technical teams, because quite often as a business, even our engineers will sit down and they'll work with our solutions architects, they'll work with our sales team, they'll work with our finance team in some cases, they'll work with product managers, project managers. They need to be able to articulate both to technical teams where they really care about the detail, other engineers where they want to go into the nitty gritty, but then also the other teams that work really closely with us, like your project managers, etc., that might not necessarily have the depth technology-wise, but need to understand the implications for the business, for the project as well. So that's quite an important thing for when we hire in our team, is those people that have the experience of working with those technical and non-technical teams, because that ability to be bilingual is really, really important for us.
Thanks, Cameron. You said publicly you're not always looking for external hiring support, which tells me you're protective of the quality and culture you build. What's your approach to getting hiring right for platform teams?
I think it's balancing technical understanding with sort of cultural fit. It's making sure that we hire people that are technically gifted. They understand the technology stack that we use, or at least they're able to quickly adapt to the technology stack that we use. But it's also hiring people that will be the right fit, that believe in the kind of improvements we're trying to make to our systems, to our platforms, to our products, and that are willing to come on that journey with us. Because I think as a whole, we're in quite an interesting place where we're going through a lot of modernization, and you need people to come on that journey with you. So I think those balancing those two things is quite important. I think if you go all in the technical, that's great, but you've got to then get them on that journey with you. If you go all in the journey, there might be a lag in terms of how quickly you can get people up and running. So I think that's quite important to balance the technical side with the coming on that journey and understanding the strategic outlook of where we're going as a business, and be willing to sort of come on that, ride that wave with us, really.
You're leading teams across, different time zones like the UK, the Philippines, Australia, New Zealand, and you've talked about, not being able to just swivel a chair in remote environments. What changes when that's no longer possible?
A remote team it can be challenging, but it's one of the most rewarding things to be part of, because one, you get top people from all across the world, which brings different views, different outlooks, different skills and experiences, the flexibility of time zones and a follow the sun model, which is really valuable as well. I think what has to change is how you can't it's very difficult to synthesize togetherness, but there are tools and processes that you can follow to try to help better that gap. So, for example, I've used in remote teams, we've used LiveShare, which is a plugin for VS Code, and it's really good. You can get sort of genuine real-time pair programming through VS Code natively, including audio. You get a shared terminal, you get all the smart things like get ignore objects for the other person, not being able to write into read-only versions of the terminal, all these kind of good things. And that is as close to physically sitting next to somebody and looking at a code problem as you can kind of get on a remote team. But you also have all your other ceremonies. So how do you bring together? I think when you're in an office or you're physically together, you quite often hear what other teams are doing, right? You speak to somebody grabbing a coffee. Oh, you're working on this project. That's cool. We're doing this thing. That synergy happens because those conversations are natural. So what you've got to do is try and make those conversations natural in a virtual environment. So we have quarterly, we obviously have business all hands, but we have a quarterly platform engineering specific all hands. We will give key business updates from our part of the business and share that elsewhere, but equally we'll take core updates from other teams and bring that to our all hands. We have a monthly newsletter that we send out at the end of every month. It details all the key things we're doing. We share that to other parts of the business in much the same way as we update key things from other parts of the business in those newsletters. Communication is so important. You've got to keep people in the loop and sort of synthesize that togetherness as much as you possibly can. And I think if you can do all of that, I don't think it really becomes a challenge. I think you get all the rewards of a remote team, with balancing all the challenges to the side.
The remote first forces you to replace proximity with clarity. What does clarity actually look like in your world?
It's shared direction and clear ownership. So I think we talked about roadmap and that being a shared piece between product and platform, and I think that's really important. Having that publicly visible is massively important. We have an internal platform engineering site. Our roadmap's up there, points to our product roadmap. They're both aligned. We speak regularly. That's part of it. But then it's also who's responsible for what. So where, you think about things like RACI matrices and, clear ownership, who's responsible for moving a particular project or a key project forward, where are the boundaries, where's the overlap, who's responsible for that, and making all of that publicly clear as well. So I think you can have direction, but if there's no ownership, then that direction is hard to sort of follow. And again, if you have the ownership but no direction, the inverse is true. So I think having both of those things run side by side is massively important. So again, we talk about this internal site. We have a full breakdown of who's responsible for what in each team out there. So anyone, if I'm a member of finance or I'm a member of our product engineering team or whoever that is, anyone in Tribal can come have a look at it and go, this is platform engineering, this is the person I need to speak to, they own this thing, they're working on this particular part from our roadmap, that's aligned with this from product, and it's a full picture. And that gives the team clarity, not just our team, but all the teams around the business, the sort of shared team on what we're working towards and why we're doing it as well. Why is really important.
And you might have mentioned that already with that internal site there, but I mean, kind of like welcome packs and like hubs for onboarding, and like what goes into a great onboarding experience for a platform team member, especially when the platform itself can be quite complex.
Yeah, we have in platform engineering, we have a platform engineering specific onboarding pack. So obviously the business does its own onboarding process, but then we have specific to everyone that starts in platform engineering. On day one, They get a welcome pack which details who is platform engineering, what do we do, what do we work on, what do our platforms look like. It has some key people that they might, in their particular role, tailored to their role, that they might work with. And it has a real picture of that person and a little fun fact, so whether they used to be in a band or whether they cycle across the country or whatever that is, humanizing it in the same way that if you were in an office, day one you'd be showing around and go, this is so and so, they're the development lead, this is, and you have those little conversations. Try and bring that to life in this welcome pack. And then it also covers all the other things like your buddy, your line management, key sort of objectives pointing to the hub and for your team, as well as all the other stuff like how do you book a holiday, how do you approve a holiday if you're a manager, etc. So I think day one, that helps people feel part of a team. I think you get that experience in an office, and in a remote team, it's very difficult to do that. We also encourage everyone, whether they're new or moving around internally in teams, speak to the key people that they work with, just to get to know them, understand what their remit is. I mean, this is true across all of the business. I had a conversation recently with a new member of our customer-facing team, and we had a good chat about their background and how we're going to work together. We covered that off in real detail. It was really helpful. Then we had a good chat about, golf and gaming and you get to know these people, and that forms that relationship, a bit of trust, a bit of genuine human interaction. I think that's really important as well in a remote team. It can't all be transactional. Yes, of course, we've got to do the role that we're here to do. There's got to be a human element of it as well, because you lose some of that by not physically being in an office where I can swivel a chair and go, oh, I saw this thing, you might be interested. You can synthesize that again with these sort of ceremonies.
You touched on trust there just now, Cameron. So how do you build trust against distributed teams where people might never or very rarely meet in person?
You make everyone feel heard, for starters. So less speaking to people, but actually hearing their problems, because in a global team, different teams across the world will have different problems. It might be that the problem for a UK team is that you've got, there's a noisy customer somewhere, that might be a thing, or there's a particularly busy period because you're working on something here. Or it might be that you're feeling distance from the rest of your team. How do you resolve those problems? So listening to what the problems are and what the pain points are for each of those teams is the first part. And then sharing that success and sharing the improvements that we're making as part of these, again, we talk about the newsletters, talk about the platform engineering all hands, giving key updates and making sure that we focus on all the teams that we've got in terms of different disciplines, but also in terms of geographies, making sure that they are all represented when we give monthly newsletters, we give key updates, we talk about what we're working on to our executive team, etc. That's critical, because you've got to make sure that it feels like one team rather than lots of individual teams working together. So I think there are definitely ways around that, but I think actually listening to those teams is the root of solving that, just sitting down with them and hearing them out.
So, I mean, you've given quite a few examples there, so not to press on it, but I mean, what's one example that you could think of that leaders might make in scaling remote teams, and in a habit that you think prevents that happening?
I think being focused on your own geography, because that's closest to you. It's very easy. I think about me being in the UK and leading teams across the world. It's very easy to have a parochial view of things and sort of say, well, these are the problems I encounter day to day, so these are the things I should combat first. And actually, that's quite a common mistake to fall into. And what you should really do is take a step back and, as I say, hear all of the views, get the collective consensus of the team, be consultative, changes, if changes are being made or we're looking to make an improvement, speak with the team before we do that, understand the implications that has on all of the team, not just the small bubble that you might speak to on a day-to-day basis. I think if you do that, you can avoid a situation where you create a boundary between two different geographies or different regions working together, and you create a sort of feeling of an actual team that's working cohesively.
Thanks for that. You've led cloud commercial and optimization, FinOps, and you describe it as obviously shared accountability and not cost cutting. What does shared accountability look like day to day?
Proper collaboration and genuine conversation. So it's a two-way street. For engineers, it's being enabled by the FinOps team who have access to all the reports and all the visibility of our cloud spend, making that real for our engineers is important. So when we think about a technical change that we might want to do, all of our technical changes go through a process where they're reviewed not just technically, but also from our FinOps team with the understanding of the implications that has on cost and also carbon footprint. But then it's also that continued collaboration the other direction where we go, okay, what can engineering do to help FinOps? What things are there available for us to look at exploring different technologies? Are there better processes or better tools that we can use to help the FinOps team identify some of these things? Are there things that are being run that are pain points for our engineering team that FinOps need to get involved with? It might be, for example, there's a particular technology that we use that might cost slightly less, but actually it creates an operational overhead. And then there's a balancing of, well, we've got the infrastructure cost potentially, or the tool cost versus the people time cost. And we can start to quantify that a bit more. So it's true collaboration. It's a two-way street. The two teams need to understand what they need from each other as part of this overarching platform engineering team, and have an honest and transparent conversation about that. Quite often in the past, we've had, I've worked at organizations where you feel like cost optimization, as I said earlier on, is punitive. It's sort of seen as we're spending too much, we need to reduce it. And it's just so much more than that. It's not about, hopefully cost, reduction of spend would be a lovely byproduct of a successful FinOps practice. But it's not the objective. The objective is to make sure that we have that shared accountability, that our engineers understand the implications, so they have clear visibility of this. We've made this change. This is what it means for us, and then that the FinOps team have clear understanding of the implications that any decisions they make have on the engineering team as well. And it's not always a balance of what's the cheapest. So it's that shared discourse really.
So where do you see organisations go wrong with FinOps, Cameron? Is it treating it like finance, policing, engineering, or is it tooling, or is it blame culture?
Blame culture probably plays a part in it, but I think that the biggest thing is seeing it as a policing measure. It's, well, we've got to reduce our spend. If you go in with an objective of let's reduce our spend by this percentage, we're spending too much, you're not going to get the all round experience that you actually want as an output of that, because the only metric you then care about is how much you've saved. And whilst that might be, you can save lots of money by just turning stuff off, doesn't solve a technical problem. And I know that's it's an extreme example, but you have to make sure that the decisions that you're making work not just from a cost perspective, but also from a technology perspective, and that you're making sensible technology decisions. So I think focusing on just the cost as your goal is not the right thing to do. It's about having a proper ongoing collaborative process where cost is understood, it's accounted for, and that it's a continuous improvement process where you look at, are there new technologies available to us? Can we move to those? Do we get more bang for our buck? Might be that the cost doesn't come down, but actually you get a greater deal of performance for this, maybe using a new instance type, for example. All of these things need to be balanced. So yeah, I think a big mistake is focusing just solely on, I've got this cost I want to save, I need to save this amount or this much percentage. That you'll never get a genuinely solid outcome across all of your teams if that's the only thing you care about. It's got to be collaborative.
And you've operated across AWS, Azure, Oracle. Sorry if I miss any, I've not mentioned them. But a lot of people get ideological about, cloud choices. And you've spoken about, pragmatic decisions like, workforce reality versus product reality. How do you decide what goes where?
It's really down to, different businesses will look at it in different ways, but picking your workload and understanding the technologies that you're going to have to use is really important. So for example, a business might use a very Windows and SQL heavy set of workloads, and for them they might say, well, actually Azure makes the most commercial sense for me. There are incentives that allow me to do this. It might be that you've got, in the past I've used, for example, GCP. I did so for no other reason than BigQuery was at its time very, very good, one of the market leaders for big data. And that was the piece of work that I was doing, was big data. So we used GCP for that component of it. And I think having an understanding of where the strengths and weaknesses are of each cloud provider, the pros and cons, and then looking at the workloads and the work streams that you intend to move into those cloud providers, get that decision process done early, because it's a lot of work to move from one, to move a full product or full platform from one cloud provider to another. It can be done, of course it can, but it's a lot of work. So you don't want to get so far down the line and go, we hadn't thought about this thing, and actually commercially it would have made more sense to use a different cloud provider. I think there's also that whole piece around being multi-cloud gives you the sort of shared. I mean, cloud providers are pretty resilient in general, but we do see outages. Right? We saw several in the sort of tail end of last year that they made the news. BBC had many articles on some of the sort of the Cloudflare outages, the AWS outages, the Azure outages. So distributing that risk is also quite important as a business. So how do you manage that? There are lots of commercial decisions or lots of commercial considerations rather you should think about before you make a decision on which cloud platform you want to host, or which cloud platforms you want to host on.
Cameron, do you think cost and carbon become a single optimization problem over the next few years?
I think so I see them both being core parts of FinOps, but I think they're slightly more distinct. So there's a wonderful I've not had the chance to properly use it. I'd love to someday, but there's a wonderful organization called Green Pixie. They do a really cool tool that looks at your cost and usage report, so your cloud spent, and it maps it to the sort of grid information from the region that you run it in terms of, it understands how much water this particular system uses, and then it looks at the rates from that particular time and gives you a really cool output in terms of your actual carbon and sort of water and energy sort of impact. You have to balance the two. So a cost reduction doesn't necessarily mean a carbon reduction. So there will be certain technologies that are more efficient than others, and moving from one to the other might save you money, but might be more carbon intense. And equally, there might be things that save you some carbon footprint, but they might be more costly. I think the two things need to be monitored and managed, but one doesn't necessarily equate to the other. There will be some things, of course, reduction in wastage generally will hopefully reduce your spend and also reduce your carbon footprint. But technology decisions need to be tracked slightly differently. And then you reach a decision point, hopefully, in the coming years where businesses can start to make informed decisions, both based on your cost of that change, but also on the carbon footprint, the carbon cost of that. Because environmental impact, you've seen this, it's in the news everywhere. We talk about AI, right? And the advent of all of the incredible sort of generative and agentic AI that we've seen over the last 2 years has a real, very real environmental impact. So businesses are going to have to care more and more, and should be caring more and more about not just the cost for themselves, but also the carbon footprint, particularly if you're running stuff for your customers. That's their carbon footprint too. And many of these customers will have their own ESG targets that they want to reach. So it's both are critical, and I see them both being part of the sort of FinOps practice as a whole. But I would just caution businesses from seeing the two as synonymous, or that one equates to the other, because it's not quite as simple as that. And there can be some nuances where things are more carbon expensive when they're less costly, and vice versa.
You could give one rule of thumb then for responsible engineering. What would it be?
It's a good question. Responsible engineering. Understanding what responsible means is the first part of that. And I think visibility, I talked a lot about visibility today, and having access to observability tooling, etc. If everyone has access to that, then it is easier for an engineer to know that they're being responsible. So how do we, as an engineer, if I say I want to be a responsible engineer and I want to be responsible for deploying stuff that aligns with all of those different conflicting needs, I need to have visibility and understanding of what every piece of technological change I make has on that. So the rule of thumb is visibility is absolutely number one. Without visibility, it is impossible to be responsible, because there's nothing to measure it against. You don't know what the cost is. You don't know what the carbon impact is. You don't know what the performance looks like. You need all of those metrics visible. And once you get that, it's very easy to then go, okay, we can be responsible with our engineering. So yeah, visibility, observability, number one.
That's a perfect lead into the future, because AI is about to accelerate everything. It's everywhere. But let's ground it now. How is AI actually being used today in platform engineering teams in a useful, non-hype way?
Well, we're all using it without, in many cases, without even realizing it. You go on to every single monitoring tool that you have access to these days. Well, they're cropping up with little highlighted sections saying anomaly detection, or use AI to analyze this trend, or it will give you a nice output that's been generated somewhere in the background. It's everywhere, and it, used correctly, it is such a fantastic enabler in terms of helping us identify bottlenecks, understanding problems that we might take time to one, identify, but then also how do we solve those. I think over the next few years we're going to see more and more tools that we use day to day integrate AI natively. I mean, you'll see it yourself. I had a Word document open earlier on today. It's the first time I've had a Word document open in a while. There's a Copilot button on the top right of there, right? That's a non-technical tool, but it's embedded in there. Then I open up our monitoring tool, and it's got all these AI anomaly detection. How do we analyze what happened here, find the root cause of this, suggest how we fix this. There are really cool things being done, I know, with some AI technologies native for cloud providers, where you can create, fault resolution, more easily as well, and that allows our teams to then work on more complex things. So it's already there. It's already being used. What we've now got to do is work out as businesses and as a society how we have proper policy around that, using it responsibly, and then how do we shift? How do we move those activities in that sort of true shift left approach, and start to focus on the more complex stuff? I think it's also worth pointing out, because we talked earlier on about when we're hiring and talking, working across different teams and looking for people that can bridge the gap technically. I think, and this could change, of course, because AI is advancing at such a crazy rate. It's a lot harder to automate and synthesize the subjective. So when you think about the skills that you might need in your teams, there are processes that the ability to look at a process and go, how do we fix that? How do we streamline that? How do we make it quicker? Those are things that absolutely AI can massively save us with. I think where that's more challenging and where people's skills will change is that the strategic thinking, emotional intelligence, understanding the needs of different teams, our customers, the differences between each of our customers, whether those are internal customers or external customers, there'll be different people that need different things. And I think it's very difficult to see how AI can properly, at the moment, understand that in an emotionally intelligent way to be able to deliver then the solutions that are the right things, not just technically, objectively, but that they're right things for the strategic direction or the subjective problems, the pain points, etc., identifying those. So I think using it is great, it's there, it's around, but we've got to find a way to shift our skill sets to be able to use them properly and then continue to work on that complex critical thinking that I think we're still a little way off yet with some of the AI tools available to us. Of course, that could all change in the next, well, I was going to say 2 years, but I guess it could all change in the next few months. That's the world that we live in at the moment.
Right world, isn't it? Over the next 3 to 5 years, then, what changes more, tooling, roles, or expectations, and what skills will matter most, do you think?
So I think tools will evolve and become less around how do we identify something and more how do we resolve something. So it would take that next level of actually fixing some of the things that it spots, rather than that being a pass. The tool was alerted us, we now fix that. Where I think, going back to that last point on what skills will become more important than ever, that complex critical thinking, that strategic thinking, is vital, because the real world is far more nuanced than an AI tool would have you think. And we've got to be able to make sure that the technology decisions that we're making are done on a human level, rather than strictly objective, AI driven, data driven. There's a more rounded picture that we need to have to be able to make sensible and reasonable and responsible technology decisions. So I think that critical thinking, that strategic thinking is going to become more important than ever. And where previously perhaps that would have been left to your leads and your sort of management team, I think you'll see more and more engineers actually having those same sort of strategic thinking and outlooks on their work and their sort of landscape.
From your perspective, Cameron, in the digital economy skills group, where's the biggest gap right now? And what's the simplest thing government, education, and industry could do to close it?
So I think access or access to pathways. So when I talk about there's a plethora of stuff in the market. We mentioned this earlier on with some of the sort of bringing together those different platforms. Knowing where to start is really difficult, and to be able to have a pathway end to end, a sort of set of structured learning materials, access to the things that will help you develop those skills in both a sort of fundamental knowledge perspective, but also hands-on experience is massively important. So getting access to that and have, and also understanding the barriers for example, think about Scotland. We're quite an interesting country in that we're quite small, but a lot of our geography, if you like, has rural communities. There's, the majority of our population is centralized in this sort of belt right across the lower part of the country. And we have to make sure that those who live in rural communities have access to these materials. They might have different problems that we might encounter in the central belt, where there's, capacity problems with networking or, internet speeds, etc. The availability of educational institutions, if that's the route that we're trying to push forward, the sparsity of those. These are all considerations that we need to look into. I think when you think about, so there's a really cool document that the Digital Economy Skills Group worked on. It's an action plan, this DSAP, Digital Economy Skills Action Plan, and it categorizes skills into sort of 4 key areas. So you've got your digital adoption skills, which is your, if you like, the very basic workplace skills, being able to log in, use a computer, send an email, those kind of things. You've got your digital transition skills, which is more around how do you use how do you transform your business and using more technology, better digital technologies? How do you look at things like, for example, integrating AI as a business as a whole? You've got your integrated digital skills, so you've got things like technology and non-tech roles. You might be working in the food market or marketing. You might be working in construction, but actually you might use quite complex technologies in there. And then you've got your very much professional digital skills, which is I am a software engineer, I'm a cybersecurity specialist, and so on. And actually having a good mapping of what each of those individual set of skills is, and then breaking it down for individuals is critical, because not everybody needs to have the ability to write code. Not everybody needs to have the ability to analyze data. These are all individual skills that for certain pathways will be really important, but there'll be people who need pathways for a different set of skills. And we need to map those, which is, again, some of the work that we've been doing with bringing those larger organizations together and ensure that they're accessible to all in the country, and then think about these things like the regional variances and barriers as well, and how do we combat those.
Great, thanks. Is it me next, Stuart? Sorry, have I missed? Did you ask?
It is you, aye.
Damn it! I kind of thought maybe it's me. And we did well so far. I mean, 50 minutes in before I had mucked up there. Sorry. You were a judge at the Scottish Women in Technology Awards, and you've spoken publicly about how important it is to celebrate those paving the way towards diverse and inclusive tech nation. Why does this still matter so much in 2026?
Because it's still very much a major problem, and it's a major problem at a very young age. So a story that I tell quite a lot, I volunteer with an organisation called Founders for Schools. Wonderful organisation. They put schools in touch with industry professionals who can get them involved in events and physically in the school. So I've done mock interviews, I've done a day in the life, I've done enterprise days, all sorts of things, workshops, those kind of activities. And on 2 separate occasions in 2 different schools, but both primary age schools, I've talked about my role and the exciting things that we do day to day and what that looks like, and cool offices and some of the cool quirks that you get, and try and bring it to life and humanize it. And at the end, on 2 separate occasions, I've been asked by young girls, younger than the age of sort of 9 years old, can girls do your job? And it breaks my heart because somewhere in those young people's lives, they have had this misconception, this preconception that this is not for them. It's not for girls, and it's so wrong. And we need to. It's everyone's responsibility to fix that. So we need role models. We need representation. We need allies. I always mention when I have been asked that I wouldn't be in tech if it wasn't for one of the best role models I ever had, which was my higher computing teacher, actually. And I still, many, many years on, think back to that being probably one of the biggest inflection points in my life. She was the greatest role model I've ever had in tech. She absolutely sold me. As I say, I wanted to be a musician, and she sold me on this incredible plan B that, really could work out for me. I had a spell where I was off school and I was close because of ill health, and I was verging on not being able to set the exam if I didn't pass the various bits of coursework. And she, bless her, she stayed behind every day for weeks to make sure that I got through it and was able to set the exam. And that was the thing that got me the grade to get me to uni, to have this wonderful career. And I owe so much of all the exciting things that I've worked on and the wonderful people that I've worked with to that one amazing woman who helped me and nudged me and gave me the confidence to do this thing that I wasn't sure of. And I hate seeing that there's still this problem, particularly that young, and you think, where is that coming from?
So what do you think creates the tech as a man's job narrative then, and where does it actually get reinforced?
Well, that's the $1 million question, really. I think visibility of role models, and it's something where we are as a world, but also as a nation, getting so much better at. I attended the Scotland Women in Technology Awards last year, which, if anyone ever gets the chance to attend, I was fortunate enough to be asked to be a judge for it last year, but I attended the events, and it's one of the most palpably empowering nights you will ever have. And you're surrounded by wonderful role models who are paving the way, not just in terms of their actual day-to-day role and discipline, but also in bringing up other women into tech and young girls and engaging at the school level and giving people genuine, true role models, visibility of those role models. And the reality is those role models are always there, but it's the visibility that's been lacking. And we've got to do more to bring that visibility up. And, amazing institutions like the Scotland Women in Tech are doing a fantastic job of that, but it's everyone's responsibility. I wish I knew the answer to the question of, why did these two young girls think this wasn't for them? Is it because they've seen something on TV? Is it an anecdote, or is it somebody's told them? Where's that come from? But it's a genuine problem that needs to be solved. And fortunately, we've got some fantastic people and some fantastic organizations that are helping with that. But it's not enough just to have visibility of role models. We need allies from all across the industry to help, empower and lift those people as well.
Before we wrap up then, Cameron, I want to bring it back to you personally. You've said what matters most to you is doing work with measurable and meaningful impact, and you've now had 3 roles at Tribal in about 3 years, which says a lot about both growth and trust. When you look ahead, what impact are you most focused on creating next?
It's a very good question. Well, I want to grow what we're doing here in Tribal. We're in a really exciting time at Tribal in terms of what we're trying to achieve with our platforms and our products and our team. I want to accelerate that, right? I want to go all in on modernizing and building better processes and getting teams working even closer than they ever have. That excites me so much, and I'm really lucky actually to work in an organization where that's at the forefront of what we're trying to do. So delivering and continuing to deliver on that and bringing teams closer together and enhancing our product sets is massive. I think one of the things I've always thought about in terms of what's next in your career, who knows? But I do want to. I really enjoy the work that I do with Digital Economy Skills Group. I've been a member of the board since 2020. Served as chair from sort of summer 2023 to the end of 2025. There's something really rewarding about giving back to the community and giving back to organizations and giving back to those who need the support the most. So I think there's probably something in there somewhere where eventually there will come a time where I'll be looking for my next sort of board opportunity or something to give back. There's so many fantastic organizations out there, and I think actually you have a whole new renewed sense of purpose when you're involved in something like that, because you're surrounded by fantastic people, the most incredibly talented people that share that same passion for, in digital economy skills groups view, it's all around making sure that we have equitable access to skills, that we have a genuine, strong talent pipeline for digital economy. So that's not just tech roles, that's any organization, any field that uses technology in any way, uses digital. And I think getting involved in these kind of organizations is the most rewarding thing possible. So I would love to continue to do some of that. I think it's great, and being able to use the skills that you developed and the understanding and the knowledge of the sector and repay those, because going back to that point I made earlier on about I didn't believe that I could go to university to study computing. I genuinely didn't believe that was for me, and it was because of that teacher that took me aside and she gave me that belief. And I know how important that those interventions and those moments can be in young people's lives. If I can repay that and offer that to somebody else, that's the most rewarding thing I could possibly be involved in. So that I think that's a core piece for me, I think, over the course of the next few years.
Nice. It's a good answer, Cameron. If you had to sum up this episode in one line, platform, people, purpose, what ties them together?
I think it's that second word. It's people. You've got platforms evolve, and you've got processes that evolve, and your purpose will often evolve as well. People are the enabler. With the right people, you will achieve an incredible amount of sort of success. You really will. Getting people right is the way to get your platform right, to get your product right, to get your processes right, to get purpose driven. So yeah, people is the most important part of it. I don't think there's any replacement for how important people are.
Great, thanks so much, Cameron, for joining us. Where can people, follow or connect with you after this if they wanted to?
So I'm on LinkedIn, just under Cameron Lepper. Also happy for anyone to ever reach out on LinkedIn if they want to chat. And I would also say that I'm quite a regular attendee of various sort of tech conferences and some of the cool events that get run around some of the spaces around the UK. So if ever anyone bumps into me, then I would always say to stop me and say hello. I'm always happy to chat.